Well, good morning and welcome to all of you that are watching online, either through Facebook or YouTube or some other means. You know, during the week, we have approximately 1,500 or more that watch these services. So we hope that you take advantage of it, and we're glad to have you here this morning. Also, right at the end of my message, we're going to be having a special time to honor Pastor Judy. So we pray that you stay tuned for that. Her workers are here along with her, and we're going to have a special time of celebrating her ministry here immediately following my message. You know, last week was an interesting week. Two people died of historical nature. One was Ravi Zacharias. And if you've never heard of Ravi Zacharias, I suggest you go to YouTube and look up some of his videos. He is one of the great defenders of the faith. His arguments about the creation and the existence of God and the Bible are just so compelling. But there was also another figure that died last week that you may or may not have heard of, but he's going to illustrate the point that I'm going to make. And that is, several years ago, there was a #1 hit television series called Leave It to Beaver. Now, some of you people may remember that or you may not. But there was a character on that show called Eddie Haskell. And Eddie Haskell was a mischievous youth that he just became an iconic figure all throughout America during the time that show ran. And of course, as the kids got older, eventually they had to cancel the show. But he was so typecast, and I want to use that word typecast because of his character, that after the show ended, he couldn't get any work in Hollywood. Nobody would hire him because everybody looked at him and said, "There's Eddie Haskell, and this is who he is, a mischievous youth." So what did he do? Well, he ended up being a motorcycle cop for the Los Angeles Police Department, and he retired from that. So typecasting, though, can go one of two ways, can't it? It either can go the way that we look at a person in the negative light, in other words, this is what they stood for and we don't want anything to do with it, or we can look at a person in the positive light, this is what they stood for and we want to emulate that. So we're going to look at character this morning. You know, as I look at my life, there were about 6 different men, there were women too, but about 6 different men that really made a difference in my life over my history. And those are the role models that I often looked up to because those were the men that had the character that I wanted to become like. You know, several years ago, Hallmark of Hallmark Cards did an interesting thing. They went to one of the most notorious men's prisons in the United States, and they wanted to have an opportunity for men to send Mother's Day cards to their mothers. And so they set up these tables that the men could come through a little at a time, and they could write on a beautiful card to their mother something, and they would take care of the rest and send it off. And so the week before Mother's Day, they just had hundreds of men lining up to write these cards to their mothers. It was so exciting and so wonderful to see. So it was such a success. So you know what they thought they would do? Let's do this for Father's Day. This was such a great success on Mother's Day. We're going to do it for Father's Day too. So they did the same thing come Father's Day. They had it all set up with hundreds of greeting cards ready to go, and they expected a big long line. And guess what happened on Father's Day at that prison? Only about a dozen men showed up, whereas hundreds showed up for mothers. It just goes to show you the impact of being a role model, being a man of character, or a person of character really makes in the lives of people. So Paul here is going to look at 2 different individuals, Timothy and Epaphroditus. And we're going to look at what character means. Timothy and Epaphroditus. Now, Timothy means honoring God. Many people name their sons Timothy. My youngest son is named Timothy. But how many people out there name their kids Epaphroditus? Come on, what's wrong? What's wrong with the name of Epaphroditus? A great man of God, a great man of character in the scriptures. So I'm going to start a movement here today that babies be born named Epaphroditus. How's that? But we're going to look at it in Philippians chapter 2, verses 19 and following, about character and what character means and what character stands for and what character's all about. So first of all, we're going to look at compassion. One of the characteristics of character is compassion. We're going to find that in Philippians chapter 2, verses 19 to 21. And hopefully you can follow along with me on that. I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, so that I may be cheered by news of you. For I have no one like him who will be genuinely concerned for your welfare. For they all seek after their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. So here we see Timothy was a person who put people before prophets. He put people before prophets. And this is important. Paul's in prison. And here Timothy sacrificed to put people, Paul, before prophets. Now we know the story of the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10. We've all heard that story about how he went out of his way to help another individual. And he is one who put people before prophets. One of our goals here, our values, is that people matter. We believe in that. People matter. In fact, we've got it on a banner in our church, that people matter. And as Christians, we are in the people business, aren't we? We live in a competitive world, though. Even today, as we look around, we see that lots of times, really, people don't matter all that much. How many people are unemployed right at the moment? Millions of people. We see stores going under like JCPenney and Pier 1 and many others. And you know what? It's just like this, and people's jobs are gone. But as Christians, we have to be of the fact that people do matter and that your life makes a difference. People matter before prophets. We've got to be known as caring people. And it's easy to be consumed, isn't it? With our professions, with our jobs, with all the things that make us successful in life. But oftentimes when we do that, we neglect the people that are closest to us. You know, when I grew up in a family, in two different families, but a family that said, you know what, the Benedicts know how to work. I used to hear that when I went to my reunions. You know, there's one thing about the Benedicts that you can count on. They know how to work. Well, it was true. We did know how to work, and we were all very good at it. But you know what? There was a cost to being good at working, and that cost was personal relationships. And even though my families were hard workers and they worked themselves and they went out of their way to provide for their families, etc., as a result, though, many of them lost personal relationships because they put the profits and the work ahead of people. You see, people matter. People matter. And as a result of that, we need to be people that also matter a lot to others. Now, also, along with this issue of character, I want to define it now a little bit. I want to define character for you. So we're going to take a look at that in Philippians chapter 2, verses 22 to 24. Again, we're looking at Timothy. We're going to look at what is this quality called character? What is it all about? Here's what we read. For they all seek after their own interest, but not those of Jesus Christ. But you know Timothy's proven worth. I want you to focus in on that word, proven worth. You know Timothy's proven worth. How as a son with a father he has served me in the gospel. I hope, therefore, to send him just as soon as I see how it will go with me. And I trust in the Lord that shortly I myself will come also. So here we want to look at this word character, and we see that character it comes before conformity, that character comes before conformity. We want to develop character and not be conformed to what the world says is character, but we want to have character that is defined by what God says it is. Now here he said Timothy was a man of proven worth. Proven worth. How would you like people to say that about you? You know what, so-and-so, they're proven worth. You can just count on them. Somebody said this. Somebody said a man's greatness is not determined by the value of his wealth, but by the wealth of his values. Isn't that true? You know that God is looking for people who are living transformed lives. Transformed lives. They're not conformed to the world, but they're living transformed lives in the world and to the world and showing the world what a follower of God is all about. Romans chapter 12, verse 2 says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Timothy was a man of his word. He was consistent in public as well as in private. And he could be counted on. He was a man of, quote, proven worth. And so the question is are you consistent? Are you consistent? You know, that you don't act differently in front of one group of people versus another group of people. That you are the same all the time. You're not a split personality. You know, one way you're this way and the next minute you're over here. That confuses people. And people that are closest to us can see the difference and they know the difference. You ever heard somebody say, yeah, they're like this, but man, wait till you see the other side of them. Well, you know what, folks? There shouldn't be another side of us. There shouldn't be that opposite side. That we need to be people of proven worth who are consistent all the time. Be the same. People can tell the difference. Put character before conformity to this world. Third thing I want to see here concerning this issue of character is this issue of commitment. We're going to look at commitment next. And that is found in Philippians chapter 2, verses 25 to 28, with this man called Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus. I thought it was necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother and fellow worker and fellow soldier, and your messenger and minister to my need. For he has been longing for you all, and has been distressed because you heard that he was ill. Well, indeed, he was ill, near to death, but God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but also on me, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow. I am all the more eager to send him, therefore, that you may rejoice at seeing him again, and that I may be less anxious. So here we see that commitment is putting Christ before comfort. It's putting Christ before comfort. Now, I don't know about you, but I love my comforts. And I love my recliner, I love my coffee, and I love my 75-inch TV. And you know what? My wife's eyesight has some issues, and so we had to buy a bigger TV, and it's rather close. But let me ask you something. Let me ask you something to you men. Is there ever such a thing as having too large of a TV? I mean, I've never heard a man say, you know what? I've just come to the conclusion that my TV is too large. I mean, we don't do that, do we? We don't do that. No, we love our comforts. We love our comforts. But Paul mentions that Epaphroditus is a man who's committed to the cause of Christ before his comfort. Now, if you know the story here, the Philippians sent Epaphroditus to Paul with offerings to help him. It was an 800-mile journey, and in those days, I mean, that took 6 weeks over rough terrain. There were bandits all around. You know, you can just picture like the stagecoach days of the Wild West, where there's bandits up there in the rocks, and they're trying to interrupt them and shoot them out and take all their gold. Well, those were difficult times, and as a result, it was a very difficult trip. And he had to fight the elements as well. He had to fight all kinds of different weather issues and so forth. And he became very ill in his service to Paul. He became very ill. But he later recovered, and Paul sent Epaphroditus back to the Philippian church with a letter that we have today and that we're reading now. You know, there's going to be times when God asks you to get out of your comfort zone. To get out of your comfort zone. And that's scary, isn't it? It's scary to get out of your comfort zone. There have been about 4 times in my life that I can specifically remember where God said, you know what, I'm going to move you out of your comfort zone, and it's going to be rather traumatic. And I remember once when we left a ministry, we felt like we should move back to Northern California to be near our families. And we left under good terms, and it was a good, positive experience. And we left a church doing very well. But we felt like we should move back again to be closer to relatives. But you know, God didn't open the door, and we were literally packing the U-Haul. The U-Haul was being packed. The kids were fussing and crying, and we packed the U-Haul, and we had no idea where we were going. We were going to probably go live with relatives because we had nothing had opened up. And yet, right at the last minute, just as we were practically pulling out of the driveway, I got a telephone call stating that there was a church that wanted to restart, and they wanted my help, and they thought I'd be a good fit. You know, but talk about getting out of your comfort zone. Here we are with 3 little kids, no income, no support, and yet God provides. But sometimes God does that to us, doesn't he? Sometimes God just says, hey, you know what? I want you to get out of your comfort zone and serve me for the cause of Christ and let me take care of the rest. And that's exactly what he did. Well, how about you? Maybe God's been speaking to you about something or speaking to you about someone, putting someone on your heart, saying to you, you know what, you could do this. You could get involved. You could be a part of this. There's things that you can do. You know, you are able to do this, and you could volunteer for this, and you could use your money or your education or your experiences to make a difference in people's lives. You can do this, and I'm going to commission you to do it, and I'm going to put it on your heart to do so. That God does that, doesn't he? And oftentimes he uses the church to make a difference in our lives, and he's maybe calling you to do something in this church or somewhere else to make a difference in people's lives. That's what God does. He takes us out of our comfort zones and puts us in a place where we have to totally trust him. And that's exactly what happened to Timothy and Epaphroditus. And we're reading about how these men of character did that and followed God. And as a result, we have their example to follow to this day. Next, I want to look at that issue of courage. The issue of courage found in Philippians chapter 2, the last two verses of that chapter, where he says this about Epaphroditus. I am all the more eager to send him, therefore, that you may rejoice at seeing him again, that I may be less anxious. So receive him in the Lord with all joy and honor such men, for he nearly died for the work of Christ, risking his life to complete was lacking in your service to me. We're going to go to a brief slide here. I want to give you a picture of courage. This is a picture of courage. This is Memorial Day weekend. We're celebrating people who were people of courage, who sacrificed, put their lives on the line before self because they realized there was a greater cause. And that's what we're celebrating this weekend with Memorial Day weekend. But also as believers in Christ, we need to have courage. We need to have courage. And many of you do have courage. You have it in your careers. You have it in social situations. You have courage, and you do that all day long in different situations. But you know what, folks? Sometimes we need to have courage in all areas of our lives. For instance, I often see that people have courage in some sort of career area or a social setting, but when it comes to courage in spiritual things, they often hesitate or pull back or become a little bit fearful about stepping out. This was brought home to me several years ago when I was an intern in a rather well-to-do church down in Southern California in Orange County. And so I would attend board meetings as an intern to see how they did things. Well, I remember going to one board meeting, and there were several rather what I would call high-powered people on that board, and we were discussing the issue of this eucalyptus tree that was in the back of the property, this monster eucalyptus tree of 70, 80 feet up there. And due to those torrential rains that sometimes hit Southern California, along with the winds, this eucalyptus tree started to lean towards a neighbor's house. And so I watched as, excuse me, these men spent well over an hour discussing what to do with this eucalyptus tree. Now, these were men of some distinction, and I'm sure at their places of employment, they wouldn't have spent more than 10 minutes on something like this. But these men debated it for probably about an hour and a half when I was there about what to do with the eucalyptus tree. And guess what? They finally decided just to cut it down. And it's like, really? Why is it that, these people in their one area of life had great courage, but in another area of life, when all of a sudden they're part of the church and they're working for the church, that they were so indecisive and so fearful and so timid. But I find that that's often true with a lot of Christians, that they're very timid in things when it comes to spiritual things. And yet God tells us to reach out there and just go for it and to help people become what they can be through our efforts and through the gospel. We can't live two different roles, all right? We've got to be spiritually what we are all the time. God says, step out there and serve. Give to a ministry. Commit your time. Perhaps even right now, make a decision that when we gather together again as a church, that I'm going to get involved. I'm going to make a difference in this society of ours, in this culture in which we live, in this Manteca, Lathrop greater area in which we live. I'm going to make a difference. Because you know what? There's a lot of hurting people out there, and you have the opportunity to make a difference in their lives. But you need to have courage. Now, who is it that was famous in history that didn't have courage? Remember the Wizard of Oz? Remember the lion, the guy that played the lion? You know, remember he was one always looking for courage. He never had courage, so he wanted to go to the wizard to get it. Well, you know what? We go to God to get our courage in spiritual things. And God may be calling you to step out there and to say, I'm going to go do something that I haven't done before. I'm going to get involved in some area. I'm going to make a difference in this society of ours and help people who are hurting today to find a hope and a reason for living and for the calling that we all have. This last week, I had an opportunity to write a letter of reference for a young man about his character. And, you know, you ever write those letters of character? You know, you say, well, what am I going to say about this person? You know, am I going to lie, or am I really going to tell the truth? Or how am I going to frame this so the people on the other end of it really get a good idea of what this man's character is all about? Well, you know, as I wrote this letter, I really felt like this man in particular had these qualities of Timothy and Epaphroditus. And I felt like I could write that letter in all honesty, that he really fit the bill for these two people. And so I asked the question, you know, how many times do you think that you could write a letter for somebody about their character, and that their character really could fulfill the qualities of Timothy and Epaphroditus? And in your own life, if somebody had to write a letter of reference about you, would they be able to put down the same things that were true of Timothy and true of Epaphroditus? Would they come up with the same things, or would they have to fudge a little bit and to lie a little bit on that letter of reference because you really didn't measure up? Well, you see, that's the challenge for us today, is to take men like these and emulate our lives after them and to pass it on to a future generation. So God is looking for men and women that have the qualities and the characteristics of a Timothy or Epaphroditus to emulate and to be a role model for others.